Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
I am so glad that they moved me. Back in the day, I used to come up on Friday after lunch. On Friday after lunch. That's when they decided that leverage got center stage, right? I'm also, I have to say, kind of amused at how few people are in the loafer section of the room this morning. It must be a generational thing, man. Love you, James. My wife is a huge fan of loafers, so she'd be sitting here too. But it is so good to be with everybody. As Ron ended the devotional, he closed with the comment that the ball is now in our court, and the challenge is not to fumble the ball, right? As we think about leverage is the fifth core value. And one way to think about it before we dive in, it's kind of like the thumb on the hand. Can you imagine holding on to a football without a thumb? With a thumb that's been sprained, with a thumb that's been broken, with a thumb that's been fractured, right? And you're holding on to that football, and all those linebackers are trying to get that ball out of your hands, and you've got to hold on with a missing digit, right? That's what it's like to do ministry without leverage. You're holding on to this calling and this purpose without a missing digit. And it becomes that much more difficult to finish well, as we've been challenged this morning and throughout the week. The goal for us as we step into ministry, and even as we're gathered today, after you've been drinking from the fire hydrant for the last 4 days, right? And you have been topped off. You were topped off on Wednesday night. You know, the difficulty right now is to be able to finish well and to hold on to all of the truth, all of the conviction. It's been 15 years since I sat in your seat as a city coordinator and a participant. I have had the pleasure of being at every NC1 since I sat in your seat, right? And so I went through it as a participant, and I remember at this stage in the process how Maurice and Dimas and Catrice and Nicole and Jeremy and the rest of our group were gathered, and Anna was from Los Angeles in our same year, right? And we were gathered right where you're sitting, overwhelmed with choices. Some of us, I'm not going to project this on any of you, I'll just stone it for our group, but part of what we were wrestling with was this overwhelming sense of conviction. Do you still have the Dr. Seuss slide, the Cat in the Hat slide, right, in balance? When that slide came up for our group, the New York cohort that year was all type A's. It was like off the charts. Everybody was overachieving, juggling way too many things. And when we saw the Cat in the Hat slide and Dr. Ron Carter unpacked that slide for us and its significance, we were convicted. And then we heard Henry talk about the consequence of being overextended, and we were like, that's us. We can see ourselves in that story. And so by Friday, we're contemplating all of the different ways that our lives are manifesting the opposite of breakthrough, the opposite of our calling, right? We're juggling all this stuff and feeling overwhelmed. If you're not careful, that feeling of overwhelming can prevent you from experiencing the grace that Ron talked about this morning. I love the fact that the devotional he didn't read is called Abounding Grace for the Worst of Sinners, or something like that. I'm pretty sure I got that wrong. But Abounding Grace for the Worst of Sinners, that's a new thing added this year. I'm inspired by the title. You know why? Because I'm a product of abounding grace. Yesterday, Brandon said he's a product of empowerment, right? I stand, like literally in 1982, when I was an 8-year-old boy, my parents began a ministry called Abounding Grace Ministries. And their motivation was a very literal interpretation of Romans chapter 5, verse 20. Romans 5, verse 20 says, where sin abounds, grace abounds more, right? That verse inspired them as lifelong New Yorkers to begin their ministry in the neighborhood, right? Their theory of how to figure that out. What does abounding grace as promised in Romans 5:20 look like in 1982 New York City? Their theory of how to experience it was to ask the NYPD where the worst drug spots were in New York. At the time, this is before crack, heroin is still king, the first opioid epidemic, or one of the predecessor opioid epidemic, and at the time, they pointed them to 2 corners in the Lower East Side of Manhattan. And that's where they took their 3 boys. I'm the oldest of 3, right? We lived in a very different community at the time, but that's where they took us. Everything you're going to hear today in terms of my ministry breakthrough and the kind of leverage that we're talking about began then. Their insight to say, if I want my ministry to reflect abounding grace, I can't be afraid or run from abounding sin, so let me run into it. That's an example of leverage. But with that said, let's do it the way that we're supposed to do it. John chapter 12, verse 24 is our grounding verse, right? Before we read it, though, let me open it up to the room. When you hear the word leverage, I've thrown it around a bunch. You've heard it. It's on this lovely banner in the front. You know that it's coming, but what the heck is it? Any volunteers? I think we've got mics, or we normally have mics, but we don't need them right now if we don't have them. What is leverage? I see a hand in the middle. Using everything you have to its greatest advantage. Okay? Anybody else want to shout something out? What is leverage?
Of like an opportunity to upgrade to go higher in something.
Okay? An opportunity to go higher in something, to upgrade, to move from glory to glory and grace to grace, to make it sound theological. Yes.
Using influence and relationship.
Using influence and relationship. How do you mean to use that influence?
For leverage.
Say that again?
For leverage.
Ah, okay. It's great to define the word with the word, right? Any other definitions of leverage?
To put more weight on something, to balance it out or raise it.
To put more weight on something, to balance it out or raise it. Can you give an example of what that means? What would that look like to use weight to raise something?
No, I try to get like a longer ratchet or an extension to like get the leverage and put the weight on it to break the bolts.
We're gonna stay here with the microphone for a second. So when you switch the tool and you take the longer wrench, are you applying greater force? Like, are you working harder?
No.
But are you seeing a different result?
Yes.
That's what leverage looks like. The tool might be influence. It might be a resource you already possess. It might be weight that you're putting into something. But ultimately, a choice gets made, right? A targeted, was it a big action to change the wrench? Did it require like some creative brainstorm that lasted months to figure out? It's a small action that has an outsized impact. Leverage is a core value because it helps you discern the right small actions. Let's look at it in Scripture. John 12:24. Very truly I tell you, unless a kernel of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains only a single seed. But if it dies, it produces many seeds. This is a biblical example, a metaphor for obviously Christ's life, right? This God made flesh dwells among us, but the dwelling among us wasn't the end of the assignment. The end of the assignment was to finish well by dying. By dying, even unto death on the cross. But that act of finishing well meant, on the other side, resurrection. Resurrection that he didn't have to produce. Like we don't have to manufacture it. The kernel of corn or the kernel of wheat that falls into the ground and dies isn't working harder to produce a harvest of wheat. It's just fulfilling its destiny. But it had to submit to the process. You walk around, and it's fun to see trust the process on wearables. We just heard it repeated over and over and over. But now we see it on your t-shirts, right? Trust the process. But this is the process. Sometimes finding that little thing, having the discernment and the recognition that I don't have to do everything. I don't have to use every tool in the garage to get the bolt off of that engine or whatever it is. I just need the right tool. And I have to be able to discern which of the tools is the right tool. The ability to choose small actions that have large impact. Right now, you're sitting here like we were maybe. I'm not projecting. I'm just kind of educated guessing. Overwhelmed with choices. You're thinking about the lack of accountability, and all of a sudden you got like 500 names that pop into your head that you might want to call to be an accountability partner. Guess what? It ain't going to work if you call 500 people. You don't have the time, right? It's impossible to... So choosing, discerning the right one to create that rhythm is what's going to maximize the ability that you're going to get that nut off the engine block so you can fix. I'm talking like I know what I'm talking about. I have no idea which wrench is the right one. So I'm calling you the next time I need to figure it out on my car, right? But that's the power of leverage. The problem is that we choose or dream or wish for the quick fix. And the quick fix doesn't create success. If anything, the quick fix produces a long-lasting failure. We've all been there. You're going to go home. Some of you are going to go home determined to change everything next week. And you know what you're going to do? Frustrate yourself and alienate all of your allies. And it's not going to work. The solution is building capacity for long-lasting success. You're at the front end of your DVULI journey. This word capacity is going to come up over and over again in different contexts and concepts. Basically, capacity is, I don't know which wrench to choose, so I'm calling him to build my capacity to pick the right wrench. Because it'll take me all day to find the right tool. I just got to call him, put it on a video call. He can look at my toolbox and say, that one. That's the one that's going to get the thing off, right? In choosing that action, that's a leverage phone call. Because now I don't have to experiment with trial and error and frustrate myself and end up not fulfilling the job. right? Because I've got him on speed dial for situations like this. That's an act of leverage because I built the capacity. He became my friend. I have his phone number. And I wasn't so prideful in the situation where I didn't pull out the phone and make the phone call, right? To be able to choose that, now I've got long-lasting success in my car routine that I never had before. You got to move to New York. We'll figure out a way to make that happen. The process of leverage is taking small actions that have big effects, right? You're going to go home and you're going to decide which of all of these things that I'm feeling overwhelmed by am I going to approach first? I recognize that in choosing that thing, it might take a little while before that thing produces the desired effect. But I'm committed to that thing. I'm committed to growing my capacity to invest in that thing, right? So that that thing can complete its perfect work. The completion, part of the grace is patience for the thing to finish what it starts. You drop the kernel of wheat into the ground, and then you don't expect a harvest next week. That kernel of wheat has to sprout. It needs to be fertilized. I'm talking again like I know what I'm talking about. It needs to be treated well in the right environmental conditions, and then I can expect that in the right time, there will be a harvest. There's a process of being consistent in the little things over time, and then 15 years later, you look back and it's, wow, look at what God did. I was consistent in the small things over time. But how do we generate that level of consistency? The tools that grow your capacity include seeing connections, being able to recognize that if I want that nut off, I don't need to work harder. I just need the right tool. There's ability to make that connection intellectually because you've been trained, you have the skill to do that, right? But connecting those dots. A second skill or tool is identifying the capacity limits. I've already identified a capacity limit in my ability to maintain cars. I don't have that ability. That is a capacity limit. I've never been schooled in mechanics. I have to be willing to accept that fact if I want to be responsible to maintain a fleet of vehicles, right? That is a capacity limit that needs to come either because I surrender to a training curriculum and enroll in mechanic school, or I meet good friends that can help me fill in the gap, right? Or I find good vendors that I can pay to fill in the gap. But identifying the capacity limit when it arises and is an important ingredient in order to discern the thing to focus on right now. And then finally, finding the leverage points. There's an ancient Greek philosopher named Archimedes who talks about this idea. And he said, if I can find the place for the lever, I can move the world, right? If you find the right spot, you can have this outsized impact. And so being able to connect the dots is what produces that result. I'm going to tell a long story later that's going to maybe put some flesh and blood around this, but hold on to these ideas for a second because I want to illustrate fixes that fail. Right? When I sat in your seat 15 years ago, I was pretty unhealthy. I was overweight. I hadn't exercised in a while. And I remember one of the conviction points during NC1 was I had to get my weight under control, my health under control. And I looked at the guy who was sitting next to me, William Cumby from Houston, Texas. And I said, when we see each other again at NC2, if I look the same, you have permission to take me. Now, Will Cumby's pretty fit, right? And he's the opposite of how I looked at the time and how I look again today, right? But he's very fit. I said, if I look the same as I look right now, you have permission to take me out back and do your magic. And I was determined to get healthy. And in the process of thinking about how do I get healthy, right, I considered some of the short-term solutions. At the time, DVULI was in 18 months. So I knew I was going to see him in 6 months at NC2. And I had to drop some weight if I was going to fulfill it. So you look at the quick fixes, right? The gimmick diets, the diet pills. Now they're called Ozempic, right? Fasting. I had done extended fasts before, and I knew that if I did it, I could do an extended fast, and I could see immediate results. I could have a hunger strike, kind of manufacture something, trying to get press for my ministry, whatever, right? I could acquire an external influence to cause me to lose weight. But these would be short-term fixes to a longer-term problem. Fixes that are that kind fail because we connect the wrong dots. I learned in that process that a healthy lifestyle is about inclusion, not exclusion. It wasn't about what I was removing from my diet, but rather what I could introduce to my diet. For me at that stage, well, we'll get to this in a second. A second issue, they failed to address the capacity limits, right? I loved bad foods too much. That was my capacity limit at that time. If given a choice, I would choose the chocolate chip cookies every time. Maybe the German chocolate cake. I'm not going to say I was as indignant about German chocolate cake as my previous communicator this morning, but there were certain desserts I wouldn't touch and others that I always touched, right? And I failed to recognize the leverage point. The leverage point for somebody who loves and prefers unhealthy food is to learn how to like healthier foods, how to prepare healthier foods, how to engage with exercise. Now, I know you're all looking at me like, what is he talking about? He's backslidden. He doesn't look like that anymore. Or maybe he looks too much like he looked at NC1 15 years ago, right? What does he talk? Well, we'll get there in a second. In that process, I had to discover some high leverage activities. For me, the diet part was learning how to make vegetables taste good. I grew up eating frozen and canned vegetables. At that time, I realized, wait, God didn't grow vegetables in a freezer. He didn't grow vegetables in a canning jar. There's a different way to eat vegetables, and I had to learn and submit to the process to learn how to prepare fresh vegetables differently than I had been taught. And for me at that time, I had to hire a trainer because I had zero motivation. But if I was paying money to somebody, now I had motivation. So I had to hire a trainer at that time and jump in. In that process, right, I ended up dropping 80 pounds and keeping it off for about 6 or 7 years. Clearly, I have backslidden. I need to go back to the basics, those high leverage activities that can get me healthy again. I'm sharing this part of the story because breakthrough, which is part B of this presentation, isn't linear, right? Sometimes we commit and we see the breakthrough and then we slack off and then we got to do it again and it's harder the next time. It's harder the next time. Re-engaging the next time when you've been there, done that, you know what it takes, and now you've reverted, and oh, by the way, you're 15 years older, and there's all of those other things that happen in life that you got to deal with. It becomes now there's a different dot that needs to be connected for me. There's a different point of impact that I have to discover for this stage. So next year at NC1, Will Cumby may or may not be there. I know he's still connected and deeply engaged with the alumni, right? But somebody, maybe Gerald. I don't think I've ever seen Gerald make a bad food choice in 15 years. So Gerald, you have permission. If I look like this next year, you can take me out back, right? But it's part of the process of reclaiming the thing that God has called us to, and surrendering to that process even when you're feeling overwhelmed by all the stuff, right? By all the things that have come up. I want you to take 5 minutes in your workbooks and respond to the indicator questions. Do you focus proactively on the big picture or get distracted reacting to events? One of the indicators of somebody who is struggling to find leverage is we're always reacting. We're always jumping at what's urgent, right? We're being seduced by, quadrant 3? And you're finding yourself in the place of the distraction that knocked on the door, the notifications that bombard your cell phone, right? And we're jumping from thing to thing instead of focusing on the big picture. Another question, are you bold in making an impact, or do you hide out of fear? Whatever the fear is, right? I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough, maybe my secrets will be exposed, I don't have the skill set, I don't know which wrench to choose, right? Whatever it is, do you hide in fear, or are you bold about making an impact? And then finally, do you actively seek choices that have a disproportionately large impact, or just do what comes along? Take 5 minutes and respond to those questions in your journal. We're going to take a few minutes and take a pulse of the room as you've been considering the questions and reflecting in your journals. If we have any volunteers to share with us, where are you as you've self-assessed your current capacity for leverage? Any volunteers to share?
For me, I am very fearful when it comes to like leverage. Just because I've known, like going over all of this and like putting it all together, I feel sometimes like I'm not good enough, even though I've been pushed in places where I didn't even think I would be. And I've seen it, but sometimes in myself, people are like, oh, you're fine, you're fine. No, I'm not. I'm freaking out. But seeing it on paper and seeing what I'm scared of, it really puts it into perspective of I really have to trust myself. Yeah. And I don't know if I trust myself all the way because I don't want to fail leverage. I don't want to fail the people that are giving me leverage or showing me how to have leverage.
Yeah. Can anybody relate to that? I think they call that imposter syndrome, right? Remember Gideon? When the angel comes and calls Gideon and says he's a mighty man of valor and he's going to do all this great stuff. And Gideon's like, wait, what? I'm the least member of the least family of the least tribe in all of Israel. Who am I to do this thing that you're calling and equipping me to do, right? Imposter syndrome is real. And if we're not careful, it can rob us of those small actions that can have an outsized impact. Thank you so much for sharing. Any other volunteers? AC. AC from where? Columbus.
Oh, thank you. For me, I think I've been aware of leverage in my life, so I've had access to it, but I have not always utilized it. For an example, as far as more from like even relationships. So like there are people that I know that are like in prominent positions, but my relationship with them has not been based off of what I could get from them. And so I've prided in that almost to the detriment, because now I'm in a position where I need to leverage that. And so historically, I haven't. I've had it around me, but I haven't really accessed it the way maybe that I should have.
Yeah. Sometimes those relationships are challenging to steward, right? Because we don't want to look like we're always asking, and we're afraid to come across as always asking. And so navigating what that relationship means so that it's mutually beneficial and we're giving more than we're getting.
Yeah, I said I do seek to actively make choices that have a disproportionately large impact, but sometimes I just do what comes along in the effort to be open to God's ability to move in unexpected ways. So an example might be, I connect with Rodrigo because I know of his position in DVULI, seeking to leverage, that relationship. But then I'm also open to meeting Pat and never knowing, how that relationship might be able to benefit my ministry or benefit his as well.
Can anybody else identify that or identify with that, where you're desiring to focus all your energy on these small things that have big impact, but there's a lot of questions as to how much of that is just me trying to exercise control? Should I remain open and flexible so that when Rodrigo steps into my life, I have room for him to engage? Can anybody else identify with that? So creating those guardrails and the ways of thinking about not only the choices that you're making in terms of the programming decisions and all of that, but where do I invest my time in relationships? Which relationships do I need to be more invested in or less invested in? One more. Corn.
Hey, Jeremy, when I was going from this to that, I drew an arrow, and the arrow from this to that was scarcity. Scarcity was keeping, I'm trending in the better direction, but I was distracted because of scarcity. I was hiding because of my scarcity mentality. I was doing whatever comes along because of a scarcity mentality. And I've shifted some things to work on that, and that has began to move things in the other direction. But I said, dang, that was deep right there when I was just reflecting on the impact of scarcity.
I'm so glad you shared that. Can anybody else relate to that? That may be for some of us the big fear, right? I know when I started my DVULI journey in 2010, I was in a transitional place in my ministry, and so much of that transition was rooted in finances. Or should I say the absence of finances, right? And the fact that my family was subsidizing my calling. And that's not their job. I was asking my family to provide and to endure the stress that came with irregular paychecks and having to delay deposits because of cash flow problems and all the other stuff, the weight. And so it drives a lot of decision making sometimes that is not focused on big picture, because real talk, I got to figure out how I'm paying rent because I'm behind and I don't want to get evicted. It drives it. And if we're not careful, we get overwhelmed by that. We're going to transition, right? Keep in mind, leverage is about choices, discernment, seeing dots, making the right decisions, committing to this long-term process that DVULI has invited you on and that you've begun officially at Local Workshop 1, but really dove into the deep end here at NC1, right? As you do that, we're going to watch a quick video and transition to what's on the other end of this discernment, right? In terms of breakthrough. Let's watch this video.
Art is capable of doing many things. It can heal, help prosper, and educate. But art activists say the benefits aren't reaching those who need it most. A 2014 report by the New York City Comptroller found that 419 schools in New York City, or nearly 30% of them, did not have a full-time certified arts teacher.
Kids overwhelmingly in low-income communities of color lacked any sort of arts education. And for us, that was the impetus.
Thrive Collective is a nonprofit arts education provider celebrating a big milestone. The organization just completed 300 murals throughout public schools and communities over the last 9 years with the help of 25,000 students. Their goal is to eradicate artless education.
The same communities that birthed hip-hop 50 years ago are overwhelmingly the ones that are under-resourced in arts education, not because they aren't overflowing with creatives and talent, but because institutionally there's been a fracture and a divide.
They hope to bridge that divide and leverage the creative capacity of the neighborhood. During quarantine, they connected with PS 155 and Renaissance School of the Arts in East Harlem to paint a mural in the summer of 2020. Today, there are now 4 murals. They're also working on their second original hip-hop song and music video.
Love over everything. Love is what we need.
Justin Guanillo is learning to rap through the organization's rhyme program.
My favorite part of the program is that I'm able to write my feelings into the rap. It builds character and it allows kids to be creative and it doesn't destroy their creativity.
Whether it's painting a mural or learning music, the arts are helping the children think about their future.
I'm grateful for that because me practicing my rhyme, not only has it helped me, but it can help my family.
And because of the tough times New York City public school students pushed through these last couple of years, Thrive says that they need art for healing, and they hope that more city funding is committed for art education.
So that video is dated. That's 2.5 years ago. On Sunday, we will complete our 700th mural. But I wanted to show that video anyway because it depicts not just my breakthrough planning process, but there are actually 3 different breakthrough plans reported on in that video. The student that you saw interviewed was a student at a program called RHYME. RHYME is the byproduct of the breakthrough plan of Randy Mason, who came through DVULI, who was part of the COVID year, right? So he started and was interrupted and then finished. But the subject of his breakthrough plan is the program called RHYME. The student that was introduced as a RHYME student at the school, you saw B-roll of him performing a song, recording a song. That was at a center called the Living Redemption Youth Opportunity Hub, which was the subject of Maurice Winley's breakthrough plan in 2010. Before that student was our student, he was Maurice's student. Maurice empowered him in that space, connected him interdependently with us, and we piloted RHYME in Maurice's space starting in 2018. That was the pilot year. It became something more than that as part of the breakthrough plan going through DVULI. The mural that you saw being painted by kids in the video there, the news report, that mural is on 125th Street around the corner from the Apollo Theater. You know who commissioned that mural and worked with the Business Improvement District on 125th Street? Our dear friend Maurice Winley, right? And the Living Redemption Youth Opportunity Hub. This stuff is real. When we talk about leverage, it's about choice. Guess who never chose to be an art curator? Me. I am an accidental art curator. But since 2014, I've had a direct hand in producing over 700 murals, right? I didn't design, it wasn't built into my breakthrough plan that Thrive Collective would become an arts education nonprofit. The goal was to move the needle on public education, the promise of public education. Why is it that so many kids graduate from inner city schools unable to read, unable to compete in an information economy, performing math at substandard levels, right? That was the actual subject of the breakthrough plan. Going through the process, we discovered a lever point was the absence of arts education. You know what's an unintended consequence of a mural project for a muralist? The fact that they've just made math real. Because when you have to scale a design from a piece of paper to a massive wall, that's math. You didn't know you were doing math. When you have to decide how much paint I'm going to purchase to manifest, that's math. When you have to figure out how much it's going to cost and how much we're going to have to raise to buy the materials and pay the artists and all the stuff, that's math. They think they're doing art, and in fact they are doing art, but as we heard in the devotion, the body is comprised of many members. So they're doing art and also learning about math. They're also learning about conflict resolution. They're manifesting interdependence because in some schools, 100 students design and execute one mural. How do you do that if you're not actively working through conflict? Learning how to communicate, developing a shared vision. I'm using loaded DVULI language that will mean more to you as you trust the process, right? But they experience the breakthrough that comes when a community rallies around common cause and brings it into fruition. The 700th mural that we're painting this weekend is being painted by one of the artists who was involved in the first mural we did in 2007. At the time, we never intended to be a mural entity. It was a complete one-off from the after-school program in the projects across the street from the school. We got a grant. We were maybe being a little bit scarce because we had this grant to do a beautification project at the school, but we opened it up and didn't keep any of the money because we asked a bunch of artists to make the school beautiful, right? And so we shared it with the artists, and the school became beautiful, and within 4 years, it was an A-rated school. And we could track the improvements at the school academically to the school year after the completion of the mural. Now, I'm not so naive as to claim credit. There was a lot of things going on in the school, but the environmental change was a signal that reinforced, not only for the students, but for the entire community, those other changes that were going on in the school, right? And it became an A-rated school. And that's when I was in DVULI, like, oh, this is cool. We did this thing. What are we going to do about it? This one-off now became the foundation for all the other work. Something that we heard in the devotions yesterday and then reiterated today. Ron said that prayer is like breathing, right? And for our spiritual life, we have to embrace prayer as essential as breathing. How many of you consciously inhale and exhale right now? As we're doing this, you're consciously thinking about inhaling and exhaling. We subconsciously breathe on a regular basis. But how many of you have experienced the leverage that comes when you match purpose and intention to that subconscious act? Have you ever been in a hostile environment where your blood is boiling and you're about to erupt? Have you ever consciously made the decision to slow down your breath to follow Mr. Miyagi's example. Inhale, exhale deeply, think about the breath, and all of a sudden the emotion starts to die down. And you're able to think before you react and escalate the situation, right? Prayer is as essential as breathing for our everyday life, and when we marry intention to it, it becomes a leverage point. When we're conscious about where we're praying and how we're praying, now we can engage things a little bit differently. Luke 11, 1 through 2. Now it came to pass as he was praying in a certain place that one of his disciples said to him, Lord, teach us to pray. So he said to them, when you pray, say, Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. This is the second time Jesus teaches the disciples the Lord's Prayer. The first time, it's in the middle of the longest sermon we have of Jesus. It's found in Matthew chapter 6, right dead center in the middle of the Sermon on the Mount. The disciples were drinking from a fire hydrant that day too, and they forgot. So they asked for a reminder. They watched him praying. They said, how do you do it? And they come to him when he is in a certain place. As somebody who's written a lot, I could tell you if I ever submitted to Gerald, my editor, an article that said I was doing something in a certain place, he'd probably circle it in red and say, which place? Right? Or if I'm not willing to say, well, do you really need that phrase? It doesn't add any value. He doesn't specify the place. The story doesn't specify the place. But you see the disciples ask for the place, and he teaches them the prayer he's already taught them, but this time it takes on a new meaning, because when you pray, say, Our Father, hallowed be your name, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. This idea that the kingdom would be manifested on earth as in heaven feels tangible. Not an abstract, like if I'm thinking about the kingdom of heaven in heaven, it's an abstraction. But if it's going to manifest on earth as in heaven, it's not going to feel so abstract. My physical body is an image. I'm an image bearer of the Creator who created me. I am not an abstraction. I'm comprised of flesh and blood. You can see me, for better or worse, before you today, right? The kingdom on earth as in heaven. We began to pray this prayer with intention. And this is how we remixed it. Help me be an answer to someone's prayer today. Give me eyes to see and ears to hear what you see and hear, and the courage to respond. Our theory was the manifestation of the kingdom on earth as in heaven feels like answered prayer. There are people in this building praying. There's a grandma right now praying for that kid who annoys you every single time you see him. And that grandma is praying that God would send somebody to that kid's life, and guess who he annoys every day? You are the answer to that prayer. Give me eyes to see and ears to hear what you see and hear, and the courage to respond. Engaging that kid differently becomes an act of leverage. We prayed that. We went to my son's school as a parent in 2010 when I was going through DVULI, and I prayed that on the first day of school. And I saw opportunities to serve in the school that I had never seen before. And in the spring of 2011, right after I graduated, we completed our second mural. It was a cool experience. I had an intern. I said, film this. Let's do some documentary on it. The Department of Education threw that on their website. The following year, Hurricane Sandy hit in 2012. On the back end of Hurricane Sandy, a principal at a school that had $1 million of damage from Hurricane Sandy saw that video. We had been supporting the school in their recovery. They said, can we do a mural like that for the 1-year anniversary? So we did our third mural. in 2013, 7 years to do 3 murals. After the third mural, remember, I had gone through DVULI, wrote a breakthrough plan. I wanted to be involved in public education reform and engaging schools differently. After the third mural, we start getting phone calls. In the spring of 2014, we did 4 murals with students in 4 different schools all over the city. Then the city issued that report that you heard about in the news clip. We saw a leverage point before we understood the leverage point. But the report came out, and now we understood it. We were in. Schools were calling us. We were not setting out to be an arts organization, but now we had 7 murals under our belt. And more calls started coming. And in the 11 years since that spring, we've done 700 murals. Because we prayed a different kind of prayer. We read from verse 3 in Romans 12 during the devotional. But the theme verse for DVULI reminds us, don't be conformed to the pattern of the world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. When DVULI talks about breakthrough, that's the bullseye. That we would be transformed. Not that you would transform yourself. Transformation is the byproduct of being. The apple tree doesn't have to work hard to produce an apple. It just has to be a healthy apple tree. And the fruitfulness of the tree takes care of itself because it's part of the tree's DNA. It's what it's been called and purposed to do, make apples, right? The transformation is the byproduct of being different. How do you be different? By thinking different, by renewing our minds, by surrendering to this process, by not trying to manipulate it or accelerate it out of pocket, but by submitting to it, and then we can test and approve his will, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. Breakthrough is a lifelong process. I wanted to show both my backslidden breakthrough and my current lived experience because it is a lifelong process. And there are peaks and there are valleys. For each of us, embrace the process that's unique to you. Evan's breakthrough is going to be different than Anna's breakthrough, right? And for Evan to try to do it like Anna would be to fail, to set himself up for failure. Because God didn't call Evan to be a carbon copy of Anna. He's placed Evan in a different context, a different city, a different time period, right? There's so many layers of differences. And we have to embrace the unique process for each of us. Take time to explore that current reality, but then as you have these emerging insights, apply them to that reality. Flesh out the story as you practice it, as you implement it. Be willing to adjust along the way. We overcome the enemy by the blood of the Lamb. You had nothing to do with that. And the word of your testimony. You have everything to do with that. A is your testimony. Does it have integrity? Are you accountable, balanced, interdependent, empowering others, seeking leverage? If you're consistent with that, there is power in the telling and the viewing and the experiencing of that story. Experiment with options. You're going to make choices and they're not all going to be the right ones. Some of them are going to fall short, and that's okay. Remember the empowerment talk. There are people in this room that will take the hit for you. And if there aren't people in your community that will, be that for somebody else, right? And look to your cohort for support when you get the hits. And then be consistent as you trust the process with the agenda for change. Breakthrough, this word that I've been using, is strategic, significant, sustainable change in the way I live and work. Sometimes you backslide and you figure it out and get back on track. Sometimes you find the breakthrough evolving as I have, and I'm riding the wave and figuring it out as we go, right? But it's strategic when you make the choice. Is the thing that you're choosing to do strategically connected to your mission and calling? If it's not, when you're deciding which relationships to invest in, probably not one that's for you right now. Maybe for you down the road, but for you in this moment, is it significant? Is it going to add value to the thing that God is calling you to do? And does it enhance your sustainability? And then finally, when you achieve that breakthrough, when you're in pursuit of the breakthrough, it's not just for you. It's about the people that you're stewarding, that you're leading. Implementing a strategy to empower others for ministry with urban youth. Some of those people are in the cohort alongside of you, as Maurice was with me. To this day, about, I would say, at least half of the cohort I went through DVULI with, we actively collaborate on things, right? Regularly. That grant that he talked about yesterday, that's how we got to pilot Rhyme. He didn't pay us $10 million, but he gave us some fuel in our tank so we could manifest God's heart for us and in the process serve him and reach that student that you saw on the news clip. We then prayed purposefully, right? We began to pray. This is at my son's school. Before we did that second mural, we did a prayer walk and we're praying, and you see the scaffolding. When the scaffolding came down, we did that mural that I talked about. And this is what it looks like all these years later. I wanted to show that picture, and we're going to close with this slide. But if you are a student of hip hop, you've heard of the Stapleton houses in Shaolin. This park shares a parking lot. If you're not a student of hip hop, that's where the Wu-Tang Clan is from, right? The park shares a parking lot with Stapleton houses. We had previously, across the street from this elementary school on the other side of the photo is an intermediate school. We had painted a mural there. And on the other side of Stapleton houses is a senior center. We had painted a mural there. And we had been working in this elementary school. 2 years ago, a 14-year-old boy was shot by a 16-year-old boy and killed right there in that playground. It was the third incident of gun violence in and around that school in that academic year. The school reached out to us to help facilitate a Peace in the Park initiative in public art. We reached out to 20 artists and painted that over 2 summers with students from the school, community volunteers, and the artists. It's a statement of shalom in that community, right? A statement that gun violence isn't the answer in that community. I could go through and give lots of other examples, but in real time, this is what it looks like. When you say yes to the process and you trust all those DVULI people that say it over and over and over again. It counts, and I'm excited to see where you are in 15 years. God bless you.